for joining in conversation with one another and being flexible in the middle of a sermon. That's fantastic. Our traditions are important to us, right? They teach us about who we are and who we are called to be. Our Jewish siblings practice this tradition of Passover. Now, as Christians, many of us don't do this tradition of Passover. Rather, we have a different tradition, a tradition that Jesus taught us about. And it's one that he taught us about when he was practicing the Passover with his disciples. We have the tradition of communion. Every week, we gather around that table and we share a meal with one another. Now, this meal that we share with one another isn't arbitrary and meaningless. We join in a meal around that table for a reason. We do it because it reminds us of who we are. In a world that is constantly trying to pit us against each other, rating some above others due to our jobs or our education or our income level, whatever it might be, our looks, we gather around this table and we are reminded that we are equals before God. God does not see hierarchy in God's people. We are equally loved before God. And when we gather around this table every week, we are reminded that sometimes we mess up. Sometimes we sin and we say or we do the wrong thing, or we don't do the right thing that we were supposed to do. And then when we gather around this table, we are reminded that we are forgiven, no matter what. God forgives us unconditionally and says, "You are welcome here because you are my people." And when we gather around this table, we remember that sometimes we are like the Israelites and we suffer. We are oppressed because of the systems in this world, or because people tell us that we aren't worth anything. And then we gather around this table in this tradition of communion. And God reminds us of our identity as loved, no matter what. We are loved, and there is nothing that we can do that would bring that love of God to an end. This tradition of communion is important. It teaches us that we are a loved and forgiven community of equals before God. And it calls us to who we are meant to be. It calls us to be a people who love one another, no matter what, who forgive and support each other, and who work so that all might feel that love. All might feel that equality before God. Our traditions matter, whether they are the tradition of Passover, reminding us of slavery and freedom out of Egypt, or whether they are the traditions of our families and our friends and our church communities, like a tradition of a block party, or a tradition of communion. Our traditions are important because they teach us who we are and they call us to who we are meant to be. Amen.